Hello, you're listening to VCB Radio. This is the Catalyst Show. We are the Racial Justice Network. I am Sarai. I'm the communications worker for RGN, and I'm here with.
Hi, I'm Grace, and I work for the Unlearning Racism course and collective and help coordinate that stuff within the Racial Justice Network.
Great. So, how are you, Grace? Just to break down before we get into some deep chat.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Enjoyed a bit of International Women's Day. And nothing much else has been happening this week. Just sort of been taking things slow. It's your birthday coming up.
Yeah. Woo, it's my birthday. Well, it'd be my birthday today. For those that are listening on Friday. So this week we're reflecting and talking about International Women's Day, which I don't think is essentially a day. It's like an annual thing reflecting of like the women in the past, the present, and the future. Here at RGN, we have a very diverse group of people that work within our network, and we kind of want to talk about them and talk about internationalism and intersectionality, because there is still a big erasure of other women that need to be included in International Women's Day when we're speaking about all women, basically. Grace, I wanted to ask you, like, what does International Women's Day mean for you, and how have you celebrated or how have you acknowledged International Women's Day in the past?
So I think the key word that you just said there is around like celebration. And International Women's Day for me feels like a celebration of all of the sisters in my life who have interconnected struggles, and just recognizing that with each other and taking time to celebrate and uplift like the voices of women, and just having an opportunity to do that. I think like where I've seen International Women's Day like done well and where it's like most impacted me has probably been some of like the Women of the World festivals that have happened. So like whether that's been like a lot of the sort of stuff happened in London, but then there was also during like the COVID and the pandemic and stuff like that, there was international Women of the World festivals that happened like across the globe, and like in Bradford and online and in different spaces. Did you attend any of those, or have you heard of them?
I haven't heard of them. What's the one in like Bradford? Like, is it like kind of a celebratory like thing, or is it like people talking?
Yeah, I watched some of the London ones because couldn't like go down to it myself. And then the Bradford one that I saw was like during 2020. And there was like various different things that were on. Like they were at one point, like there was like a joint cooking like together online. And another point, Penny from the Racial Justice Network, our director, did like a conversation with her mum and with another woman who'd been involved in the Racial Justice Network about like sort of what feminism had meant to them through their like familiar sort of life and through their families. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Well, that's really interesting. I love that. Like you said about sisters, like sisterhood there. I think definitely like my auntie's kind of, I guess for like me, like International Women's Day isn't necessary. It wasn't necessarily like a big thing like growing up, but it was more of like, I think the more spaces I'm in now, like the older I am, I'm aware that there is a time where women are celebrated. But I think like the women in my life, I celebrate them all the time. So I guess Women's Day is like every day. And I also guess as well, what we will be talking about like a bit later on in the episode is like kind of like the origins of International Women's Day, it was part of the suffragettes movement. Well, history does claim to that it was part of the suffragettes movement, but like there was women before that that was trying to fight for equal rights. So I guess that push for like I guess like non-black women, non-brown women, in International Women's Day is like something that's like always kind of opposed onto people. Um, so yeah, I guess that's probably why I wasn't really aware of it growing up, but I'm more aware of it now and how that affects me and my everyday life as like a Black woman, I guess, and like how feminism plays a part in my life. But yeah, I think like International Women's Day now is more of like a deep reflection of like how I am seeing my own womanhood and how that plays a part and a role in my life, my everyday life. And it's something to celebrate, definitely. Yeah. So I guess just like a deep reflection, that's how I'm spending this week, definitely.
Yeah, I like that marker of like reflection and stuff, because I think all too often, like when you asked me to like come into this conversation today and stuff, like it really did give me the opportunity to like sit down and think about like what has feminism meant to me like throughout my life, and how has that changed and evolved over time, and how has like that understanding shifted. Yeah, and it really like, I don't necessarily think like had you not given me that invitation, I definitely probably wouldn't have took the opportunity to do that. And it's been like actually really great. I've enjoyed it.
I'm glad to you joining me, because I think from like your perspective with being like part of the Unlearning Racism course, you have a different angle. But like we have similarities and differences, and we can learn from each other. And I think as well with like the spaces that you're in, there is different conversations around International Women's Day that are being held compared to like my space. Like I guess not to like necessarily put you on the spot, but like from like an Unlearning Racism course coordinator's perspective, like I guess what matters the most for you as like a woman in today's society?
I suppose like for me, something that like that I'm starting to like grapple with is so some of the readings that I was doing was around like radical compassion. So I was looking at the work of Lola Olufemi, and they talk about like feminism as justice work, and saying that like feminism is much more than just equality, and it's about like having this idea of radical compassion, which I've heard like a lot of people use recently, and it's sort of been like a phrase that's been like that's been about a bit, and I think like my understanding of it wasn't really quite clear. So like if I think about compassion, I think about like empathy or sympathy for someone based on like their experience of suffering. Like that's like the traditional like definition term of it, right? And what Lola was saying was that basically like radical compassion means like refusing to ignore the pain of others. And that's like the central idea of it. And I think like in relation to like unlearning racism, like what is important about that, I should probably disclose, so I'm a white woman, and the work that I do in unlearning racism is really about like understanding like the history of how like racial categories were created and what that means and how that impacts on people's lives. So like for me, it's really important that I understand and hear the voices of Black women in my life, because without doing that and without having like access to the understanding what their sort of situation is, what their life is, that those voices are the voices and struggles of trans women as well, which often are minimized in like feminist spaces. It's like, actually, like, I can't have radical compassion if I don't know these things, because otherwise it becomes all too easy to ignore the pain of others. Does that make
100%.
sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess with like radical compassion, like you said, you need to understand other women. And I also think it helps you to understand yourself as well and your
Yeah.
position as a woman. And how, like, again, no pun, but like unlearning the things that you've been taught as like a white woman who, how do I explain it? Like, I guess in the Western society, like white women are like, well, from history, like white women have always tried to be equal to white men. That's kind of how International Women's Day from the Western point of view started, because it was white women trying to be equal to white men, but they were ignoring all the other women that were fighting for their own equal rights and their other intersections and their, you know, like there's like disabled women, black women, and brown women. So I think to not allow history to like repeat itself, like although like you're fighting for like equality, you need to fight for other people's equality as well. Like there's no strength in just fighting for your own. At the end of the day. But yeah, I totally get the radical compassion, and I think that's a really like good word to use as well. Especially speaking about like from kind of a radical point of view, especially with RGN. Yeah, 100%.
I think it's really interesting what you were saying about like the origins of like feminism and stuff, because like when you think about like the fact that like actually like a lot of these ideas were predicated based on the belief that like white women felt they deserved to be, or like to have the same values, or the same like entitlements, I suppose, in some way as white men. And they were, a lot of that stuff was like prefaced on the idea that basically they deserved it more than black men deserved it. So like really like actually like that whole foundation is based, it's like trying to strive for equity whilst like having like these underlying like racist assumptions that are there. And I don't think like a lot of people necessarily think about like what that was and what that meant. Like how can you do that when basically you're valuing one person's struggle above another, and in fact essentially like minimizing another person's struggle in that process.
Exactly. And I think it also, like we can also like look at it from like an international point of view, because like I guess with the work that we do at RGN, we kind of do like a lot of internationalism, speak about internationalism. And like I think I was watching a video from 2019 on our website of the Sarai sisters, who if anyone isn't like aware of our website, and we have like a lot of um we have a lot of internationalism going on, and the Sarai sisters live in the Amazon, and they spoke to Penny, our director, about colonialism and how like these big corporate white men companies are like trying to push them out of the Amazon basically. And I think their like ground point and their like rebellion against that is something that we as like I guess Western women should acknowledge, because there's still a feminism in that, and there's still a time to celebrate them and like their courage to do that, and to stand their ground for like, you know, their homeland basically. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yes. So just a little bit conscious of time.